Hi, hello, welcome back. It's me, Devraj, back with the Liber Vel Legis, the Book of the Law. And just to remind you, if you're interested in this text, then this online version from the OTO website is pretty cool because it also contains within it, embedded links to Crowley's original writing. Let's just scroll down to the beginning and let's just briefly go through what we've been through so far. I think we got up to Chapter 1, verse 48. Someone is shouting in Turkish in the background. Sounds like he's trying to sell something in the street. A little bit of authentic background there. But we saw earlier, these first 14 verses of the book, they kind of set the scene and, fundamentally what it's trying to do, it's a reset button. It's as simple as that, Some years ago, when the first wave of computery stuff was out in the 90s and the 2000s, if you had a modem or some kind of electronic device, often it would have a little reset button and you'd put a needle through this little hole and push this little button down for like 10 seconds and it would reset the thing. And I think that is probably the easiest metaphor by which you can understand this book. It is trying to reset your consciousness. And by extension, the consciousness of the whole world, in the sense of kind of microcosm and macrocosm, but also because, I guess psychologically it's often easier to kind of consider that the world needs to change. The new order needs to come in, needs to change. I want to see change in the world because the world becomes how we project our own inner conflicts and unconsciousness onto it, in the classic kind of Jungian way. And it could be easy perhaps to read something like Liber and, be a kind of rebellious kind of person who doesn't like the old order and just see, this is really about changing the world. I'm right behind Liber, it's great. But of course, there's another side to it as well. And that is that it's about you changing. It's about you changing as well. And by change, it's not that you adopt a new persona or that you undergo some therapy, some kind of psychological work. By change, what it means is that you go right back to how your original consciousness was configured as you came out of your mum, or even in your mum if you like, and you reset to that. We can imagine ourselves as simply a pinprick of awareness in a vast world, which means you have no concept of duality. You don't know what's me and what's not me. Those ideas are kind of culturally conditioned into us. Some of them come from our DNA as well. But essentially over time, around this pinprick of awareness coagulates this kind of constant sense of personality and the kind of person that we are. And the invitation in this, especially in these first 14 verses, is to completely go back to zero, completely go back to just coming out of the womb. Years ago, I used to take and also work with a drug called Ibogaine. It comes from West Africa. And the effects of this drug was like a reset button. It was like a reset button. So you kind of went on this 30-hour trip taking this stuff, and it would be, pretty tortuous, but you'd come out kind of feeling reborn, like your consciousness had been reset. That state unfortunately didn't last, and you'd go back to the old patterns, but nevertheless it gave you this kind of reset button effect. And that's really what this book is talking about. And then as we've seen before, after verse 14, it's talking more to egoic consciousness and talking about this new way of being. It's talking about, the prince, priest, the beast and his woman, the scarlet woman. All power is given to these guys. It's very gothic. It's appealing to the kind of edgelordy kind of person, on the outsides of society deliberately. And that's one of the benefits and also one of the problems generally with this kind of work. If you imagine Nuit, this sky goddess, as we've seen, or star goddess, as an actual being, she's not trying to gather the kind of guys who work corporate to her. She wants those guys on the edges of society, rebellious, angry, a bit punkish, a bit gothic, and she's promising them stuff, it's very stylistic. It's not so much a sort of intellectual kind of, appeal to the intellect. It's just saying, you can get this. As we've seen before, it's reminiscent of like early tantric goddesses, Sarahar, and the arrowsmith woman, this kind of thing. And essentially what's happening is, the book of this part of chapter 1 is kind of laying out how it should be in the future, and, who's going to be the boss, and how you are to behave, and all this kind of thing. It's giving this name Thelema, and really it's revealing a left-hand path. Traditional esoteric and spiritual work that has come down to us is mostly kind of right-hand path. You're just trying to hold to the track of the good, hold to the track of the positive. You're pushing away demons, you're pushing away the devil, this kind of thing. You're constantly trying to affirm the positive, and you may be trying to kind of surrender your ego. And that is the right-hand path, and this is the left-hand path. It's saying you don't have to do that. It's proposing another way, that you expand and develop your ego, but you do it in the name of love. You can go around and have lots of love relationships, lots of sex, but you can't just do it for ego aggrandizement. You have to be doing it to get self-awareness. When I was with the Osho guys, myself, there'd be a lot of work around sexuality and a lot of work around authority, because those are the two areas of the human psyche where the most repressed emotion is held, for men and for women. Sexual jealousy is very, very strong. You've got a kind of lover and they're with someone else, stirs up a lot of emotion for men, but also perhaps even more so for women. Stirs up a lot of very deep feelings. And if those feelings can be processed and held, the person becomes more grounded in love. Of course, it doesn't always go that way. There's a level of risk involved. And likewise with authority, having to surrender to authority. This brings up a tremendous amount of feeling for men in particular, women also, but for men slightly more perhaps. And again, if this is properly held, the man becomes more loving, the person becomes more loving. They become more grounded in love. It's a very steep pathway to self-awareness, confronting the unconscious, the shadow, very directly. But in many ways, this is what these, getting to around verse 40, 41, that's what it's talking about. The word of sin is restriction. O man, refuse not thy wife if she will. O lover, if thou wilt, depart. You can have your pleasure with someone and move on, but you can't just do it from an ego-aggrandizing perspective. There is no bond that can unite the divided but love. All else is accursed. Anyway, let's continue along. We had a couple of number puzzles and this kind of thing. Talking about Ain, 61 the Jews call it. I call it 880, 418. We looked at Charles Stansfeld Jones last time. Bit hard is blasting away in the background here. Must be 1 o'clock. Yeah. Frater Akkad, and we noted that his name in a certain cipher associated with Liber is 418. And looked at the kind of perils of just book learning and this kind of thing. My prophet is a fool, this 111, kind of tearing into Hebrew Kabbalah a little bit. So let's continue along, 49, and then do another 6-7 verses. Abrogate are all rituals, all ordeals, all words and signs. Rahu Akut hath taken his seat in the east at the equinox of the gods. So again, it's reset button stuff. It's an eon changeover statement. And with this eon changeover, abrogate are all rituals, ordeals, all words and signs. So all the old laws, all the old spiritual concepts, out the window it goes. That's the basic concept here. Again, it's trying to pull you back to this pinprick of awareness before you imported all of this stuff into your mind. And of course, the problem with importing all these concepts into your mind is that you get attached to them. And then you start fighting with people who've got other concepts, inside their minds. And you get involved in these kind of battles and struggles with people online, from your intellectual ruach, kind of as the Hebrews, as the Jews put it, position. And it's trying to get rid of that, abrogate or rituals or deals or words and signs. All the spiritual information you've got in your brain, forget about it. Over now. So that's like for anyone who's very identified at that level. And it's famously recorded, that spiritual identification is the deepest. We really, really identify with spiritual paths. It's rare that you can find someone who's in spirituality who isn't just hopelessly identified with the path they're on. And Rahu Akut has taken his seat in the east at the equinox of the gods. So, this is the eon changeover. Pisces back one to Aquarius. And another changeover that I'm aware of, astrological changeover, also is these Saturn-Jupiter conjunctions. I think in 2020 it also shifted back one into Aries signs, into Aquarius also. So maybe you could have a sense that, the eon changeover has started here, 1904 when Crowley channeled this text. It's kind of getting going, and now there's certain other astrological forces just to kind of ram it home a bit harder for all the people who are still very attached to the old way and stuff like that. But anyway, the equinox of the gods is talking about these kinds of astrological changeovers. And let Asar be with Isa, who also are one, but they are not of me. Let Asar be the adorant, Isa the sufferer, Hor in his secret name and splendour is the Lord initiating. So I think it's, it's kind of like jumping on a little bit some of the old concepts, maybe of Isis, Osiris, Horus, obviously perhaps Jesus and that, and it's kind of, jumping on those concepts a little bit, but it's saying it's not really of me. And Hur is the Horus, Hur is the guy who's really coming in now, this child, the child Horus. Let's continue along. There is a word to say about the hierophantic task. Behold, there are 3 ordeals in one, and it may be given in 3 ways. So the hierophantic task, it's like the hierophant is there to bring people up. You go to the temple, you go to the school, the spiritual school, and your consciousness is all very muddy and enmeshed in the world and the family and all these kind of things, and you need to go through a process to refine that. So it's talking about, the gross must pass through fire, the fine be tried in intellect, and the lofty ones chosen in the highest. So I think, I'm not completely sure about that, but I think it's talking about different aspects of the self, the gross, the kind of nepesh, the animal self, it has to be, some of the garbage has to be burned off it, so to speak. And then the intellectual self, the ruach, needs to refine itself as well. And the lofty ones, chosen in the highest, maybe that's more like the kind of hermits or so, you need to kind of weed out the absolute best kind of spiritual people in some way. I'm not sure about the lofty chosen ones. Thus ye have star and star, system and system, let not one know well the other. So I think this is going back again to this kind of concept of Aquarius, of a very human-centered individual world. That every man and every woman is a star, but they're an individual, and your individual development is what's coming. The world we've been in for the Piscean era and back before it is very much controlled by the culture in reality. You might think you're an individual, but once you start to move away from some of the core things the culture wants from you, you will discover that your individuality is not really so much upheld by the state, by the culture. The culture is the organism, and you are just a cell within the organism, essentially. This is the world that has been. And the concept now is that, the individuality is really going to become important. It's going to be the central driving force of the new eon. So let not one know well the other. You're coming together for certain spiritual purposes relating to the new eon. You're having interactions with each other, even love relationships, sexual relationships, getting engaged in tasks together or friendships. But again, it's more about who you are. It's not about, creating baby or creating something, unless that's done for the purpose of the school of the new eon that's being formed. Let's continue along, verse 51. There are 4 gates to one palace. The floor of that palace is of silver and gold. Lapis lazuli and jasper are there, and all rare scents, jasmine and rose, and the emblems of death. Let him enter in turn or at once the 4 gates. Let him stand on the floor of the palace. So the floor of the palace is really a kind of a baseline kind of state within yourself when you really are approaching the inner world. You can come in through certain gates. There's different ways that you can get sufficiently inside yourself to clear enough stuff out to come into a space of, basic clarity at the kind of threshold of the inner world. And you might enter through one gate and then the next, or try different things and that kind of thing, or you might come, through the whole of them, all of them at once. But it says, let him stand on the floor of the palace. Let him enter in turn or at once the four gates. Let him stand at the floor of the palace. This is key, it's to be able to sit perhaps in a state of meditation, or stand in a space of meditation, and be sufficiently clear inside that you can access the inner world. And this is no small challenge in my experience. And then it continues, will he not sink? Amen. Ho, warrior, if thy servant sink. So what's this talking about? You might say that like sinking is a positive thing, sinking into a deep state. You've entered your state of meditation. You're in the palace. You're on the threshold of the inner world. The outer world isn't just impinging on you all the time and controlling you. But it's definitely intimating that sinking is not particularly a good thing. Ho, warrior, if thy servant sink. And this is kind of important here, this ho, warrior, if thy servant sink, because when you start to enter the inner world, what you also see is that the self that you have formed from your interactions in the outer world, the world around us, is not the real self. In some other spiritual kind of schools, you have this concept of the owner of the house and the tenant or the guest. And then the idea is that this ego that we've developed in our life, that's the guest of the house. And one day, the guest hears, or the tenant hears, that the owner is coming back, and there's a lot of fear in the guest. There's a lot of fear in the ego that the actual owner of the house, the self, is returning. So this is kind of reminiscent to that with me, with this, this warrior. The warrior is the self here, the true self, and the servant, the ego, if thy servant sink. So it's talking, it's talking about a relationship between the self and the egoic self, and it's posing this kind of problem, this kind of idea to the real self. If thy servant sink, if thy egoic self sink, is it a problem? Will he not sink, O warrior? Or will he just stand up, has the warrior, because this is the left-hand path, remember. So I think really this warrior, the real self, wants to embody also the egoic self, make it a part of him or part of her. That's the idea here, because this is left-hand path. We don't want the ego to just sink and dissolve. We want it strengthened, but we want it aligned with the real self. But there are means and means. Not quite sure what that means. Be goodly therefore, dress ye all in fine apparel, eat rich foods and drink sweet wines, and wines that foam. Also take your fill and will of love as ye will, when, where, and with whom ye will, but always unto me. So we're coming back here to this concept of the left-hand path. You can go out and have a good life. You can go out and wear beautiful clothing. You can eat at the finest restaurants, and you can get drunk and enjoy yourself, and you can have sex, and you can take your fill and will of love as you will. Not getting attached to the other person, it's okay, but always unto me. So this is the little caveat at the end, because of course it's easy, perhaps particularly for the male of the species, to see this as legitimizing having a lot of casual sex and just kind of using women to aggrandize yourself and your ego. And so there is this pushback here that, you're not really, that's not what it's about at all. It's unto me. It's in the benefit of love, or it's in the benefit of your self-awareness. If you've lived a lot in your mind and with ideas, you might have a notion of who you are as your personality, who you really are. But until you really interact with the world, until you get drunk, until you have sex with different people and find out what it's like. In the Osho scene, sometimes you'd have dates with different people, maybe they'd be sexual or maybe not, and then afterwards you give feedback to each other about your date, and it can be quite a grueling experience, because we have this idea of who we are, but of course you don't know if that's real until you actually get out into the world, interact, and see how it goes. And so that is the part where it's always unto me. It's okay to do those things as long as you're reflecting on your experience and being honest, as opposed to getting caught up in a kind of sex addiction kind of thing, or alcohol addiction, drug addiction, whatever. Likewise with substances, with alcohol, you can use them to break open your normal kind of rigid state, but it's got to be in service of something deeper, of something higher, of self-awareness, really. They tend to say love here, but really it's about self-awareness. Okay, I know myself more. I thought I was this quiet person who was really kind of meditative and beautiful. I got super wasted on this substance and just went a bit mad and realized I'm just super in control all the time. So it's that you're developing self-awareness from these behaviors. Let's continue. 52. If this be not aright, if ye confound the space marks, saying they are one or saying they are many, if the ritual be not ever unto me, then expect the direful judgments of Ra-Hu-Akrit. So it's just reinforcing this last line here, but always unto me. I'm not sure quite what he means by if ye confound the space marks, but it's also pointing, if you always say that everything is one. Some spiritual schools do this, which is of course deeply annoying as well as being completely untrue or trivially true, really, especially on the left-hand path. It's trivially true. On the left-hand path, it's very dialectical. You can't really make mental statements about how things are because you're being thrown from post to post all the time. It's a steep, intense path. So if you start saying, well, everything is one or everything is many, if the ritual be not ever unto me, then expect the direful judgments of Ra-Hu-Akrit. So if you're just doing things for your own self-aggrandizement, you went into some kind of like orgy or alcohol or drug, session or something like that, and you had a lot of amazing experiences and you developed a lot of awareness, but you also kind of thought, I really want to do that again because maybe I could get off with that one that time or just get even more wasted. That would be kind of fun. And you've got to look, what's really motivating me? Are you getting caught up in a pattern of addiction, cementing certain neural pathways and the behaviors associated with them inside your brain, or are you genuinely looking what's going on with me? And this is of course a big thing because many people who've been involved in this kind of stuff, who've been involved in this kind of esoteric work, particularly left-hand path, have got hopelessly identified with it and enmeshed with it. They haven't got into the deeper state where they can see that the exercises that they're doing are simply to lead to self-awareness. They've just got attached to them. And likewise, their beliefs, and the beliefs affects more right-hand path. They get attached to the beliefs, and ideas of, what you should do. So these guys can't get onto the floor of the palace. They can't get onto the temple floor. They're trapped in the doorways or outside the palace, attached to their stories, attached to their behaviors. So this is, this is a deep aspect of this work. And I think it's fair to say that I don't know, you obviously can't assess these things. 95% of people involved in esoteric stuff at the moment probably are in that category. They can't get onto the temple floor inside themselves because they've become too attached to what they're doing and it's not sufficiently grounded in self-awareness. Let's go on to 53. Not get too lecturing. This shall regenerate the world, the little world my sister, my heart and my tongue, unto whom I send this kiss. So, it's saying this shall regenerate the world. This is the reset button of the world. You go out there and you bring these rituals into people's lives, but you hold it in such a way that they develop self-awareness. Around the Western Tantra scene of the kind of 70s, 60s, 70s onwards, you see a lot of this. People go into the Tantra because they're excited to think about they're going to get more sex or something like this, or they're going to have wild experiences. But if it's held properly, they start to realize, hey, I'm not who I am, who I thought I am, and they start to see the depth in the work. Of course, it doesn't have to go that way. It could go in a negative direction. But it's saying, this can regenerate the world. It can get rid of the old eon. The world, the little world, my sister. It's making it out, it's not the world is such a big deal. It's my little sister, my heart and my tongue, unto whom I send this kiss, This is Nuit trying to kiss the world. We've seen the star goddess before. Also, O scribe and prophet, though thou be of the princes, it shall not assuage thee nor absolve thee. So it's saying, again, it's also warning the scribe and prophet, in this case Crowley, Though thou be of the princes, it shall not assuage thee nor absolve thee. So you have to uphold all these laws as well yourself. You have to be doing this stuff that you're going to do for love. You have to be doing it for self-awareness, for self-knowledge, so that hopefully at some point you can get onto the floor of the palace. But ecstasy be thine and joy of earth ever to me, to me. Again, same thing, to me, to me. You get the ecstasy, you get ecstatic experiences which are also transformational, but it's in service. Change not as much as the style of a letter, for behold, thou, O prophet, shalt not behold all these mysteries hidden therein. So talking about this text, don't change it, don't even change a letter, and this version here, you can click on this and it'll bring up the original writing from Crowley. So it's holding to that. And then we've looked earlier, I looked in actually number 2 of this series at this, but let's just go back through it again just to complete. The child of thy bowels, he shall behold them. Now, as I've seen, this is very close to Rosicrucian ideas of, Bethlehem, the bowels, the house of bread. And then expect him not from the east nor from the west, for from no expected house cometh that child. So again, you've got this interplay between the microcosm and the macrocosm. The macrocosmic version is like, we're waiting for the saviour, the child of the new eon. Was it going to be Crowley's child? Was it going to be Frater Akkad? Whatever. You're waiting for this new, messianic character to come to bring in the new eon. But also underneath that, on the deeper level of understanding, on the microcosm is deeper here. Actually, from no expected house could be Virgo. You don't expect a child to come from a virgin. So it's again it's talking about the regenerated consciousness that comes. The consciousness of Horus comes when the masculine and feminine sides of the psyche, Isis, Osiris, have been resolved. So when you've done enough of this work that it's proposing, you've been in all these orgies, or you've been in all this drinking, partying, celebrating, meditating, doing all of this kind of stuff, and you've actually you've cleared enough of your stuff out on this left-hand path journey, such that you can sit on the temple floor, sit on the palace floor, as they said earlier. At that point, your consciousness has become regenerated. You've become Horus. You've become the child. So as he looked at earlier, the deepest meaning is on the personal level, on the microcosmic level, and that's the same generally in Liber Al. If you're really up for it, if you really want to look, it's not just about doing this stuff, it's about who am I doing this stuff. Let's continue. All words are sacred and all prophets true, save only that they understand a little. So compared to some of the things that will come later, this is kind of it's kind of appeasing. It's kind of appeasing to like other religions, other mystical schools that have come in the past, and it's saying they're okay. Jesus is okay, and Muhammad is okay, Mahavir or whoever is okay, and all these kind of prophets that have come along. Ezekiel is okay, Isaiah is okay, but they understand a little. Solve the first half of the equation, leave the second unattacked. So it's saying, they bring in the law, so to speak, and they bring in some level of mystical allegory, but they don't really get deep into the thing. Because simply following a law, if you're following Torah, that can be a preparation for some kind of deep inner journey, but it is not the journey itself. So what it's saying is, the words from before and the prophets from before are all sacred, are all okay, but they're only dealing with the first half of the story, the first half of the equation. But thou hast all in the clear light, and some, though not all, in the dark. So that's an interesting line there, it's like, it's saying, but you can get it all in the clear light. But then it's kind of walking that back, and some, though not all, in the dark, which I think is talking about unconsciousness. You could say, looking at the kind of macrocosmic level, perhaps this concept from Gnosticism that like Lucifer, is actually the bringer of light, the bringer of consciousness, the bringer of the sun, shining the light to help do the work that's going on in the darkness, in the unconscious. But on a personal level, it's more like, okay, I've got to go deeper in self-awareness. I've got to understand myself more, go deeper in. clear out the blocked emotions, get my energy flowing better, expand my personality, gain access to all the different people that's really living inside of me. And this will be my developmental path, it's what it's saying. So this line is, a little bit of a paradox, but I think it's pointing that kind of direction. Thou hast all in the clear light, and some, though not all, in the dark. Okay, so that's up to the end of verse 56. I think we can leave it there. I'll be back soon with some more of we'll keep digging into Liber, super interesting work. I'm fairly sure you can buy it on Amazon if you want a copy for just $1 or something like that, or it maybe even be free. Really good work to meditate on and to look at what does it mean in my life, what can I do to get involved in the left-hand path in a kind of useful and responsible way. How can I get my development? How can I become a bit like the child of a new eon myself? Thanks so much for tuning in. My name's Devraj Sandberg. You can find some of my work on Amazon, and I'll see you again soon for some more mysticism in the body. Thank you.